Back in 1893, a group of disaffected Australians followed their socialist utopian dream and set sail for paradise in, of all places, Paraguay. Well, 118 years later, a curious local travel writer set off to find out what remains of the colony and the people of what was known as New Australia. Ben Stubbs has written a book about their intrepid adventures and his own. Arthur Hill produced the story.
It started many, many years ago when I first, jumped off the plane and went to Thailand like, thousands of Australians do. And the thing with me was that I was curious. I was curious as to, why people did the things they did, the languages they spoke, the food that they ate. And, these places that many Australians go, like Thailand, like Bali and everywhere, it was just the jumping off point for me. And I discovered that it wasn't just a hobby for me. It wasn't just something I wanted to do during my holidays. It was something I wanted to devote my life to. And so, for 7-8 years I lived out of a backpack, and I would just, want to chase, a story wherever it happened to be, whether it was riding a paddle steamer in Bangladesh, whether it was, going out into the steppe with Mongolian nomads, or chasing this trail of Australian descendants into the heart of Paraguay. My involvement with this came from when I was looking through my family research, looking through one of those big family trees, and I discovered a man called William Peet, who was my great-great-great-grandfather, and he was a foreman. He was a shipbuilder, and an asterisk under his name had, his most famous work was the Royal Tar, and that just happened to be the ship that sailed those New Australians into South America. And from then on, I was, it was an itch that I had to scratch, and I wanted to follow their trail to see what happened and how these New Australians ended up. This idea of socialist utopia, it didn't work. Within a matter of months, they realised that it's very, very hard to live in a vacuum, and they couldn't maintain it. Once these men were shearers, they were labourers, and once they were forbidden from, having a glass of rum in the evening or, meeting the locals, it disintegrated very quickly, and they split into two colonies, one called Cosme, and those that were rebels, I suppose, stayed in New Australia. And the idea of socialism ended within a matter of years. William Lane, the instigator, moved back to New Zealand and became the editor of the New Zealand Herald. But what was interesting was that there were pockets of Australians, the Smiths, the Murrays, the Caseys, the McCreans, who stayed behind, whether it was because they couldn't afford to leave or because they were stubborn and wanted to see how this ended up. They remained in Paraguay as farmers, and they remain to this day. There's 2,000 Australian descendants that still live in Paraguay. And Paraguay is a racial goulash, I suppose, of different nationalities. The links to Australia are becoming longer and longer, but there still is that sense of identity. Roddy Wood in Asuncion, he still wears an akubra, he listens to Slim Dusty, and the people in New Australia, they have an Australian flag at the school and everything. But the thing that's interesting is that they're kind of halfway in between. They're Australian Paraguayans now. They speak Spanish and Guarani, which is the Indian language, and English is something of their descendants, of their grandparents and everything. And so I was the Australian coming into New Australia, but all of a sudden I was the outsider. And so, the people that lived in the village, they'd knock on my door and come and want to hear my story all of a sudden. The story's not finished. There's still pages left to write, and I think that with Ticket to Paradise, I hope that I'm encapsulating something of that with that story of the third generation, the people that are left behind, and that's what I'm hoping to do with this story. What I learnt about myself, I suppose, was reflected by the time that I spent with the New Australians, was that idea, as I was saying, with taking a risk, with if you're willing to put all your eggs in one basket and just, see what's going to happen, that, amazing things can happen. With the story of the New Australians, I suppose you wouldn't call a success, but there's 2,000 Australian descendants that still live in Paraguay that would probably put their hand up and beg to differ. And I think that that's something that I really admire about them, that if you really want something, you just, you have to, pursue it and ignore all else that's outside. And I think that that's something with my own writing that I really admire. Even though it's a very long road being a creative writer, if you back yourself a little bit, in the end it seems to work out, and I really like that, the fact that, you know, if you back yourself as the New Australians did, then you'd be surprised at what can happen in the end.
And it's possibly in some ways the anti-travel book, because having read this, there's no way in hell I'm going.
My wife is Argentinian, and we're expecting a baby very soon. And for many, you know, and people kind of tapping me on the shoulder and suggesting it as well, it would be, okay, maybe it's time to, you know, put that backpack away and, you know, put on a jacket and get a proper job. But for me, it's exactly the opposite. You know, this is an opportunity to see the world from a different point of view. You know, I've seen it by myself with a backpack for a long time now. I've seen it with my wife also adapting our travel, and now we're going to have to do something different once again, which is really exciting. You know, I think that idea of travelling until you're not able to get out of bed is the sort of creed that I want to live by, and I'll be doing that, you know, through many passports until I can't do it anymore.